Okay. First Minister, thank you so much for spending some time with me talking about homelessness. Can I just start by saying Wales is often seen as a leader in preventing homelessness. How do you think the Welsh public perceive homelessness, and how important an issue do you think it is to them?
Well, we know the Chartered Institute of Housing did a survey a month or so ago asking people their views on homelessness. It's quite clear from that survey that people are hugely sympathetic to those who are homeless and want to see things done for them. So it certainly isn't the case, based on that survey, that people think, well, you know, out of sight, out of mind, and if people are homeless, somehow there's nothing that can be done about it. We're far from that position, thankfully.
No, good. So today we're launching our plan to end homelessness in Wales. Is ending homelessness something that you're committed to? It
is. I mean, there are a number of ways in which we are looking to do this. I mean, personally, I committed to ending youth homelessness within a decade. Did that just before Christmas. We know that it has to be a multifaceted approach. Yes, we need more accommodation. So there'll be 20,000 more homes in Wales by the end of this Assembly term. Preventing homelessness is hugely important. The Housing Act has made sure that 14,000 people are not homeless as a result of that act, because preventative action was taken beforehand. But of course we know that it's about more than that. It's about being able to talk to people who are in a position where they become homeless and find it difficult then to find homes. But before last Christmas, I was out with the Salvation Army at the Purple Bus here at City Hall. And what they were saying to me was, there are some people who find it so difficult to be in the company of others and find it so difficult to be in a building, they'd rather sleep rough. Now those people are the hardest to reach. So yes, we can provide the accommodation, we can provide the services, but it's being able to reach out to people that's going to be important as well, because we know for some people, you know, they see themselves as being in a situation that's so difficult that sleeping rough is their preference. Now, working with them is going to take a long time, but you know, being able to catch everybody is important.
So with that commitment, which is really, really good to hear, when do you think we might see a plan for ending homelessness in Wales?
Well, the plan's already there in terms of youth homelessness. I suppose the Housing Act is part of that plan. What I can say is that we, in the last few months, have produced a strategy called Prosperity for All. Now, it's just a strategy at the moment. It's hugely important. It becomes action. There are 5 priority areas as part of that strategy, Prosperity for All. One is housing. We can't just see housing as something that just exists in a silo. Just, you know, it's to do with the Housing Minister and nobody else. Health is involved. Social care is involved. Employment opportunities, they're all involved if we're going to make sure that we're going to deal with homelessness. It can't just be simply a question of physically building things in the hope that people will come. It doesn't work like that. So everybody is committed, cross-government, all ministers, to look at providing people with accommodation. It's not just the responsibility of one person.
And can we just talk about that a little bit more, because I'm interested in how the Welsh Government can make sure, not only across government but across local authorities and elsewhere, that we break down the silos that do exist.
It's an advantage of size. I mean, if you look at our government here, in Cardiff, most of the officials are in one place. We've got offices around Wales, that's true. We don't have the kind of physical barriers that exist in Whitehall. We're a small organisation. It should be far easier for us to be able to work together. In terms of ministers are all here on this floor. They're not in different buildings. So we want to use that advantage of size to be able to do things smartly and to deliver, rather than having to, you know, work across very difficult barriers that might exist institutionally elsewhere.
Okay, one part of the plan that we're publishing is about the need and the evidence that says if you can rapidly move people into permanent housing and get the support around them that they need, and this relates a little bit to the earlier point. Can you just talk about what we think the next steps are for that, the rewiring of the system that will be needed to make that happen?
Well, as I say, the Housing Act duties are hugely important there, because obviously prevention is the first step that has to be taken, make sure that people do not become homeless in the first place. Then working with local authorities and with private sector providers to make sure the accommodation is there. A few things we've done. Proud of the fact that we're building council houses again in Wales. We are building more houses for rent, that's true. Also, of course, we've changed the law to improve accommodation in the private sector, so that landlords now have to be registered. So people aren't going into, you know, really bad accommodation when they find accommodation and then find themselves slipping back because the accommodation is so bad and they don't have services around them. We know that if people go to temporary accommodation, it it's got to be as temporary as possible, and people have to move on very, very quickly, which is why all the government is dedicated to doing this. You know, we've got some way to go on the journey, but that's where we are now in terms of starting. We know what we want to do. It's a question of delivering.
And can I ask you, what's your proudest moment about tackling homelessness in Wales?
The fact that we haven't abandoned people, that we are working hard to make sure that there's a range of accommodation available for people, so that people aren't priced out of accommodation, so they have that around them, but also the fact that as a government we've worked together to deliver a holistic package for individuals. So it's not just about there's a room over there and a bed and that's the end of it. We know there are people with addiction problems, which is why so many people end up in the streets in the first place, mental health problems. All these things have to be addressed before we can even talk about settling people properly in accommodation. So identifying housing as a cross-cutting theme in government is massively important, but that's just the start. You know, you do that, you've still got to go on and deliver for people as well.
Yeah. Can we talk about supporting people funding? Now, clearly there's been some concerns raised in the housing sector and by one of the Assembly committees about the possible removal of the ring fence on supported people funding. What are the assurances that you can give that that won't lead to, as it did in England, great reductions in the funding that's available?
Yeah, okay, well, there are 7 Pathfinder projects at the moment taking place in local authorities. The objective of the Pathfinder projects is to see if we can have a grant scheme that's more flexible, but also broader in supporting people, so including what supporting people does, but looking at providing a wider package of support. What I can absolutely say is that if we move to a system where there is an expanded grant, it will be ring-fenced. It won't go into the RSG. So that will be for a specific purpose. It wouldn't just be handed to local government and then hopefully services will be provided across Wales as a result. We would look to ring-fence a grant like that.
Okay, can I ask something about the broader anti-poverty agenda in Wales? Because clearly, homelessness is often cited as the most extreme form of poverty, but tends to be dealt with through health and social care and housing, rather than through a wider anti-poverty agenda. Can you just talk about your perspective on that?
Well, we don't have the levers that we would need in terms of the welfare system, and there are strong arguments for not devolving the welfare system because we get a bigger share of a bigger pot. But universal credit is a problem. The welfare system isn't functioning for so many people. Not just that, there are many people who are in work, who still find it difficult to make ends meet, who are accessing food banks. We used to say to people, if you get a job, you're better off. That's just not the case at the moment in society, and that troubles me. And I think there's a spiral that can often happen with people where they get into poverty, get into difficulty, get into poverty, addiction follows, jail quite often follows, and then of course it's far more difficult to get people back onto their feet as a result. So we keep on pressing the UK government to have a welfare system that's fairer, to have a welfare system that rewards work as well, so that people are able to have better in-work benefits that are worthwhile. And from our perspective, we'll continue to not just focus on the UK government, but to look at ways how we can upskill people, give people the tools that they need in order to get into sustainable employment. Can't do it all ourselves as government. We've got to work with third sector organisations because they have experience on the ground that we need to be able to tap into. So we're never too proud to work with others to deliver what we all want.
And then finally, the last 10 years, an awful lot has been achieved. Prevention duty, commitment to ending youth homelessness, piloting Housing First. What does the next 10 years look like?
We are one of the richest countries in the world. The fact that we have people sleeping on the streets is a disgrace. When I went to London in 1988 as a student, after I'd been in Aberystwyth, I'd never seen people begging on the streets. It was extraordinary. There were 2 things I remember that struck me. First of all, people begging on the streets and people wearing helmets on bikes, which we thought was a bit odd. It's often in those days. But now it's everywhere. What seemed to be, one of the phrases that was used, I forget who said it now, somebody who had in the 80s who'd seen the poverty of the Depression and said that the greatest achievement of the post-war governments was to remove begging from the streets. Not because people were forced off the streets, because people didn't need to be in that position. And the worst thing was that it's returned in the late 80s, and it's spiraled since then. No question about that. So, from my perspective, we have to keep on refusing to accept that homelessness and people sleeping rough is an inevitable consequence of life.
Yeah.
Yes, for some people, life is very difficult for them, but that's what we need to help people. That's why we need to help people. I was in San Francisco in 2013, and what struck me there, and my kids were with me, they were amazed at the number of people sleeping rough. Amazed. And people with physical injuries, people with limbs missing, veterans, elderly people who were on the street, people in the 60s and 70s, and my kids asked me why this was. I said, well, look, part of the problem is there's no net, there's no safety net, so that people, at least some of those people in the UK, not all of them, but some of them would be in a position where they had an alternative, and also it's the end of the line. People can't go any further to try and escape, and the last thing we want is to see ourselves as a society end up like that, with those extremes of rich and poor, but to start moving back to the days that existed. I think when I was younger, 70s and 80s, where it was very rare for somebody to be sleeping rough. There were always some, but it was very, very rare. We've gone backwards since then, and we intend to reverse that.
First Minister, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.